Now that Spider-Man No Way Home has come and gone, we are all so excited to see where Tom Holland's Peter Parker goes next in the MCU, because given the end of No Way Home, that's basically the origin of this MCU Spider-Man. It's like things are really getting started for this character. So of course we want to see what's next. We want to see what's going to happen in Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6, which has been, at least Spider-Man 4 has been confirmed by Kevin Feige himself. Amy Pascal kind of confirmed that there's going to be a whole second trilogy, which is super exciting, and there's just a lot that can be done with this. I did a video the other day about, Vincent D'Onofrio wanting to be Kingpin in Spider-Man 4, and that's something we could see. There's pretty much an infinite amount of possibilities for this next MCU Spider-Man trilogy, and that is exactly what we're talking about today, guys. So it's not any news or confirmations or rumors or anything today. This is purely a speculation video, and you can let me know your own speculation / wish list in the comments below about what you want to see from this next trilogy of Spider-Man in the MCU. And so this is something I probably should have done right after No Way Home came out, when all the hype was around it, but the ideas kind of just popped into my head. I think there's some pretty good ideas, and I've basically planned out this whole Spider-Man trilogy, and I highly doubt this is what's going to happen. But then again, these plans that I have would be amazing to not only actually see, but actually could happen. It is possible, and there's stuff that's set up to make it go down this route. And that is exactly what we're talking about today, guys. I got 3 movies planned here, Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6. So, without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into this with Spider-Man 4. Which, I have titles for these movies, but they're not, official titles. Pretty much just hey, I found some cool fan art logos for these Spider-Man movies, and I was oh, that's a good name, so I'll use them, and obviously you see them in the thumbnail here. But this first one, Spider-Man 4, would be called Spider-Man A Fresh Start, because of course Spider-Man really is with a fresh start. Basically his whole life has been reset after Spider-Man No Way Home. He has no friends, no family, nothing, and now he's going to college, and that's going to be a big thing in this trilogy. That's why it's Spider-Man the College Trilogy, because he is now graduated high school and he is going to college. But one thing I'd really like to do at the beginning of this movie, Spider-Man A Fresh Start, is to just go into this movie and just have the first scene of it be a battle between Spider-Man and some cool, maybe obscure Spider-Man villain, because that's something we haven't had before. We did it, I think probably one of the best examples is Avengers Age of Ultron, how that movie literally opened up with the Avengers fighting Hydra. I'd love to see something like that here, where we open up with Spider-Man fighting Jack-O-Lantern, which is a character that you may or may not know. Again, he is kind of an obscure villain, but he's still a villain that I really like to see in live action. I feel like he'd look really, really cool in live action. But then again, he is a smaller, lower level villain that could be defeated really easily, in just one quick scene at the beginning of the movie. But I feel like that'd be a really cool way to start off this film, especially considering how literally the official script and screenplay of Spider-Man No Way Home said in that final scene that Peter Parker is no more and that there is now only Spider-Man, that we open up this movie on Spider-Man in his new life as just Spider-Man, kind of giving up on being Peter Parker, kind of like what we're going to be seeing in the upcoming The Batman movie, where there's basically no Bruce Wayne and he's Batman full time. That's what we'd be seeing here with Spider-Man. So I'd love to see that. I'd love to see Spider-Man versus Jack-O-Lantern, or really just Spider-Man fighting any villain here in the beginning of the movie. But like I said, in this trilogy, Spider-Man is going to be going to college, and this is something that we haven't seen in any of these other movies before. We got bits of Peter in high school in both the Amazing Spider-Man movies and the Tobey Maguire Raimi movies, and then obviously the whole first MCU trilogy was set in high school, and those were some of my favorite parts of that Tom Holland MCU trilogy, was the high school part, specifically in Homecoming. So I'd love to see that kind of continue here, just now at a higher level, now in college. And when it comes to Peter starting college, of course, that means he's going to be meeting some new people, and he kind of needs that in his life right now because he literally has nobody. So this would be honestly the perfect time to introduce basically all replacements, replacing Ned with his new best friend, Harry Osborn, who I think Timothée Chalamet would be a great casting for that role, and replacing MJ as his love interest with now Gwen Stacy, who could be played by, I don't know, maybe Sabrina Carpenter, Dove Cameron. There's some good options there. So yeah, I feel like this really would be the perfect time for that to happen, especially considering that, he's starting college. It makes sense he'd be meeting new people. This is, I believe, when he actually met those characters in the comics, or at least in the original Spider-Man, the animated series cartoon. So I feel like that would be really the perfect timing to be introduced to those characters in Spider-Man 4. But now, though, what are we doing about the villains? Because, of course, that's one of the things that gets me the most excited for these movies is the villains. I love Spider-Man villains. He has such a rich rogues gallery that we've seen a whole bunch of great Spider-Man villains in live action before in all three different franchises. But who are we getting in Spider-Man 4? Well, I would love to follow up on basically the cliffhanger of Spider-Man Homecoming, where we had the introduction of Michael Mando as Matt Gargan, and just teasing, especially in that post-credit scene with Michael Keaton's Vulture, that he would one day become the Scorpion and join the Sinister Six and do all that stuff. Well, in Spider-Man 4, at least in my pitch here, that is exactly what's going to happen, and Scorpion would be the main villain of this movie. The thing is, though, Scorpion is not going to be alone, because Scorpion, sure, he can be cool and he can have some cool fights with Spider-Man, but he's not really that big enough to be, the main villain of a movie, so we're going to have some other stuff going on here as well. Like, for example, we're also going to have the Rhino, a much better version of the Rhino than what we got in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This time, they could do the mech again, just make it look better. Or, honestly, I would prefer to do it literally like they did it in the comics, or at least, in Spectacular Spider-Man, where it is an actual, Rhino armor suit thing that goes over and fuses to his skin. And I don't really know much about, what they do for casting for the character. It depends on which version of the Rhino they do, whether it's the Russian version or American version, I don't know. I did see one good casting idea, which was Ron Perlman. I feel like he's got the look and maybe even the voice for Rhino. I feel like that'd be pretty cool. So you got Scorpion and Rhino, two animal-themed villains here, but they're not just popping up out of nowhere, just being like, oh, I'm a Scorpion, and oh, I'm Rhino. No, they are being supplied by Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin. Because now that we have him back in the MCU after his appearance in the Hawkeye Disney Plus series, I really want to see him battle Spider-Man, because he was the main villain of Spider-Man the Animated Series. He is originally a Spider-Man villain, so I want to see him heavily involved in this trilogy, not as the main villain of just one movie, but the overarching big bad of this whole trilogy. So he would be appearing in all three movies, and was set up to the big final battle with that character in the third one. So he's going to be kind of just supplying our villains with this tech and with this upgrades to take down Spider-Man. For some reason, I don't really exactly know what it would be, but he has some sort of grudge against Spider-Man, so he is sending out all these criminals to try and take down Spider-Man. And I would love for him to actually be working with Alistair Smythe, just like he was, again, in Spider-Man the Animated Series. That's a really big inspiration for me on this whole Kingpin storyline. And with Alistair Smythe, you can actually have him make the Spider Slayers. I feel like that'd be another cool thing to have maybe towards the beginning of this movie, where they send out the Spider Slayers, Spider-Man defeats him easily, and then that's when they decide, alright, we need to up our game, and that's when they create the Scorpion and the Rhino. And so I'm not really even sure if Rhino and Scorpion would be working together, but at some point, Spider-Man would be fighting both of them in this movie, and I feel like Scorpion would be a bigger villain than Rhino would. But also in this movie, if you didn't already think that was enough, and this may be overstuffing it at this point, but I feel like this would be a nice way to kind of tie it in here, is following up after the post-credit scene of Spider-Man No Way Home with the symbiote. So we know Tom Hardy's Eddie Brock Venom left a piece of the Venom symbiote in the MCU, so I feel like at some point in this Spider-Man 4 movie, that symbiote will make its way to Peter. He will bond with the symbiote. He will get the symbiote suit. And I really want that to be also kind of a slow burn, instead of doing what they did in Spider-Man 3 with Tobey Maguire, where they tried to fit in that whole storyline in that movie on top of other stuff like Sandman and Green Goblin. They can kind of do a slow burn here, where there's no Venom in this first Spider-Man 4 movie. That'll be in the next one. So in Spider-Man 4, Peter would get the symbiote, and he would go off fighting a bunch of villains, and I love some cool villain cameos here, like maybe have Spider-Man fighting some villains like Hammerhead and Tombstone, some more street-level mobster Spider-Man villains. I think that'd be really cool to see, to really show the strength and the power of the symbiote suit, and really get that kind of obsession, almost addiction with the symbiote suit that Peter would be having, just loving this new upgrade of the symbiote suit, especially given that he's in such a dark point in his life right now with like nobody to turn to. He could have this symbiote suit and have it be almost like seeing it as like a gift from God or something like that. But at the end of it, when he has his final battle with Scorpion, maybe at the beginning of the movie, when it's just Spider-Man without the symbiote suit, he gets defeated by Scorpion. But then at the end, when he does have the symbiote suit, he not only does defeat Scorpion, but almost kills him because of the rage of the symbiote. This would be, of course, when he realizes the bad influence it's had. So he gets rid of the symbiote. But then we have, I don't know if it'd be a post-credit scene or just at the end of the movie, that symbiote is still going to be sticking around, and it is going to make its way to and bond with Matt Gargan. So Matt Gargan is Scorpion no more, but now he will become the Venom of the MCU. But we'll talk about that in a minute now. So that is the end of my pitch for Spider-Man 4, aka Spider-Man A Fresh Start. So let's move on to the next movie in this trilogy, Spider-Man 5, aka Spider-Man vs. Venom, where Venom will not be the only villain in this movie, of course, because like I said, I love Spider-Man villains, so I'm going to try and fit as many in here as I can. Like, for example, Martin Lee, aka Mr. Negative, who, obviously, there's many actors that could be cast in that role. I think Steven Yeun would be a great idea for that, because, of course, he does the voice of Invincible. I love that series, so I love him in the role. There's some other actors that'd be nice as well. But I feel like Martin Lee, Mr. Negative, would be great to have in this movie. Again, kind of doing a Kingpin / Rhino role from Spider-Man 4 in this movie, where he's still a main villain, but less of a main villain than Venom. Like, I'd love to see him involved here. You can see kind of the split personality between actual Martin Lee, where he's like the head and the owner of Feast and, you know, that homeless shelter and everything that we already know exists in the MCU. Aunt May was a big part of that, and that could be actually something that really drives Peter into this, because May was so dedicated to that could be a great motivation there. So I'd love to see Mr. Negative involved there in this movie. And then also another character that I think would be perfect to be introduced here is Felicia Hardy, aka Black Cat, who I've also got some interesting casting ideas for, like either Sydney Sweeney or Anya Taylor-Joy. I think would be my top two choices. I did a video a couple months ago about actually rumors that Sony wants Anya Taylor-Joy to play Black Cat. But yeah, so that's kind of the basis for this movie until we get to Venom. So like I said, we are going to be having Matt Gargan as Venom in this movie, which I think is a great idea, because you already have Tom Hardy as Eddie Brock Venom in those movies, and that's a separate universe, obviously. So instead of doing an MCU version of Eddie Brock, just use Matt Gargan, who was the second person to take on the symbiote and become Venom in the comics. I feel like that'd be a really nice way to differentiate it. And also, Michael Mando is a great actor. It'd be lovely to see more of him in the MCU after being Scorpion. So they could do that here, and they could really explore the whole storyline of, because Peter had the symbiote before, now that Matt Gargan has it, he knows that Peter is Spider-Man, and he knows like everything Peter was thinking. That'd be a really interesting thing to explore. But the way that Peter could defeat Spider-Man, because, you know, Matt Gargan is now souped up with this Venom symbiote, how Spider-Man is going to defeat him? Well, it's actually kind of with the help of Mr. Negative. So I don't really know exactly how it worked in the comics, but this is kind of based off something that happened in the comics. So for my idea, basically Spider-Man defeats Mr. Negative, and then he uses a part of the symbiote. I'm not sure if maybe he kept part of the symbiote after he had it before, or if he gets it during one of his battles with Matt Gargan Venom, but he has part of the symbiote. He combines it with the power of Mr. Negative, and just like in the comics, creates the anti-Venom, which of course is kind of a synthetic white symbiote that its whole purpose is to purify symbiotes. So I would love to see Peter Parker Spider-Man suit up in a white anti-Venom symbiote suit to take on and battle Matt Gargan Venom. I feel like that'd be really cool. This is something that, again, was inspired by another Spider-Man cartoon. This time, actually, Marvel's Spider-Man, its third season, Spider-Man Maximum Venom, where he did have, it wasn't an anti-Venom suit, but it was a white symbiote synthetic suit. And I feel like that'd be really cool, and would be also just like an awesome look for Spider-Man, and would be a great way for him to defeat Venom. But then after that, we are still not done with the Venom symbiote though, because even though Matt Gargan is not Venom anymore, although maybe he could get it back again someday and join the Thunderbolts as Venom, just like he did in the comics, that's another possibility. But we're gonna have another post-credit scene where somebody else gets the symbiote, and that is going to be Flash Thompson. And I don't know if this would be the return of Tony Revolori from the first MCU Spider-Man movies, or if it'd be a different actor playing a different character that's like, just a different name. I don't know exactly how it would work, but he would of course be setting up Agent Venom in the MCU. And that transitions us into Spider-Man 6, our third and final movie of Spider-Man the College Trilogy, which we'll be calling Spider-Man Sinister Six, which I think would just be perfect for the sixth movie in the Spider-Man trilogy or franchise to be a Sinister Six movie. So, who will be our Sinister Six for this film? Well, I've got some great picks here. So first of all, we're going to be having some returning characters from the first Spider-Man trilogy in the MCU with Mysterio. Whoa, shocker, he's not dead. Yeah, it's true. We all saw it coming. He is alive. We're going to have Jake Gyllenhaal back as Mysterio. Probably my favorite Spider-Man villain, so of course I want to see him back here. We're also going to give the return of Michael Keaton as Vulture. Perfect time, especially considering that now he no longer knows that Peter is Spider-Man, and we know he's going to be in Morbius, so I'd love to see him back. We're also going to be seeing this third member. It could be possibly Matt Gargan back as Scorpion, or it could be Martin Lee, Mr. Negative. I feel like that's kind of an interchangeable role. It depends on, the availability of, would it make sense for Matt Gargan to go back to be Scorpion? I don't know. But that's kind of the third-ish member. And then we're going to have Shocker returning from Spider-Man Homecoming. And don't worry, he's getting an upgrade because just like all these other villains getting upgraded by Kingpin, he is getting an upgrade and he's going to get a much more comics-accurate suit, which we know he was actually supposed to have, or at least there was an idea for him to have it in Spider-Man Homecoming because there's actual toys and merchandise of him in that comics-accurate Shocker suit. So I would love to see that in live action, and that's exactly what would be happening here. Then we'd also have the return of Rhino from Spider-Man, A Fresh Start, and then also Kraven the Hunter. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, Kraven the Hunter, he's not in any of these other Spider-Man movies you talked about. Why would he all of a sudden be showing up and joining the Sinister Six? Well, we know that we are getting a Kraven the Hunter solo film in 2023 starring Aaron Taylor Johnson. And while I highly doubt that Spider-Man is going to be a big character in that movie, I feel like maybe that film could possibly just end with setting up Kraven to be alright, I'm Kraven the Hunter, and maybe even a post-credit scene or something like that being, oh, here's my next target, it's going to be the Spider-Man. He learns about Spider-Man, and then that's his next hunt. He's going to go after Spider-Man. So then maybe in this Spider-Man 6, aka Spider-Man Sinister Six, he shows up in New York City, and he's looking for Spider-Man, and he gets recruited by the Sinister Six, maybe gets some tech upgrades. I don't know exactly how it would go, but I really, really want to see Kraven in the Sinister Six. So there we go, there's our Sinister Six, but the thing is, Spider-Man, he can't really defeat them all on his own. I mean, realistically, he probably could, and that's how it happens in the comics, but then again, at the same time, why not utilize some of these other characters that have already been set up in this trilogy? For example, bring back Black Cat. This is where you could bring in Flash Thompson, Agent Venom, following up after that setup and tease of him becoming Agent Venom. So have that three-person team up against these six villains. That would be amazing to see. And then finally, you get this big final battle that has been building up over this whole Spider-Man trilogy, with Spider-Man teaming up with Daredevil against Kingpin, the big man of crime, which would be so cool to see. We all know we want to see a Spider-Man Daredevil team up against Kingpin, and I feel like this would be a great way to do it. Sure, again, there's a lot going on in this movie with the Sinister Six, and then also this. I realized that, but again, it's just a wish list. This is just, me tossing out ideas there, and I think this would be awesome. So, guys, that is my Spider-Man the College Years trilogy, my ideas, thoughts, wish list, predictions, whatever you want to call it, for the next MCU Spider-Man trilogy. This is what I really want to see. Obviously, you can tell I love me some Spider-Man villains, and I want to throw as many in there as I can. Like I said, you can let me know your own thoughts, theories, predictions, whatever you want to see in this next Spider-Man trilogy in the comments below. What do you think about my ideas? Do you want to see Venom in the MCU? Do you want it to be Matt Garkin? Do you want them to do their MCU Eddie Brock? Do you want the Sinister Six? Do you want all this other stuff going on here? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, guys, thanks so much for watching. Please drop a like if you enjoyed this video and hit the subscribe button so I can keep it up to date on everything that goes on in the Marvel life.